The floor is yours.
I apologise for taking the floor in both parts, but now I speak on my own behalf. But I really welcome that statement from the Commission. This has been a very long and painful story, I think, for everybody involved. But as one of the dirtiest parts of the dirty man of Europe, I think it's really worth recognising in public that we in the North East have moved from a pretty deplorable state in terms of our water quality to an area of really outstanding natural beauty, and that's largely as a result of European environmental protection legislation. So it's clear that in terms of EU membership, that environmental protection legislation, and particularly the water legislation, has been vital in terms of improvement of beaches, rivers, and the water system, and improving investment in our urban wastewater system. But we have to be vigilant to make sure that we don't slip back, and that actually the commitments which are being taken as a member state are being properly enforced on the ground. And I'd just like to pay tribute to Bob Latimer and to those involved in many of the campaigns which have led to that European environmental legislation, because you have to be very dogged as a local campaigner, in many cases going up against very big vested interests, when you care about your local community and the area that you live in, and you're facing, in often cases, very difficult roadblocks along the way. It can be very, very frustrating. And it's worth remembering that when Mr. Latimer brought the complaint in 2000 about what was going on, his main objective and his main concern was actually about the quality of the water that his grandchildren and local children were swimming in. And his location on top of the rocks in Whitburn and overlooking the spill pipe means that he has a unique position to be able to see how often that spill pipe is actually being used. And if you haven't visited the area, I would really encourage the Commission staff to visit, because that gives a different perspective on some of what is reported in official data compared to what is visible and identified by local campaigners. It took many years to be heard at the European Court, as I've said, and it was also down to the hard work of the former Labour MEP for the North East, Stephen Hughes, that there was this big campaign which led to the test case being taken. So we're not undermining or dismissing what has been done. The problem is that Northumbria Water had 5 years to implement the European judgment, and the remedial works which were undertaken, which are under debate as to how effective they've been, were only completed within days of that grace period. So it has been such a long, drawn-out story, and in some ways, because of that, and because people locally are still taking photographic evidence of raw sewage on the beach, in rock pools, underneath rocks, the impact on the sea life, and in some cases, raw sewage coming out of locked manholes in pipes which technically shouldn't have sewage in them, there is a lot of distrust. And I have to say, it's one of my regrets as an MEP that I haven't managed, which I did in other petitions cases, I haven't managed to get all of the participants around a table to try and find a good solution to the situation that we're in. But I would really plead with the Commission that they try and get everybody around a table, and that they engage constructively with the local community in Whitburn and Mr. Latimer, because it would be tragic if we'd fought for European environmental protection legislation. We had dogged and committed local campaigners who wanted to see that legislation implemented locally to improve the environment in our communities. And then the breakdown in trust means that that legislation isn't having the impact that it should have on the ground. The last point, I guess, is to reiterate Mr. Latimer's point, that there is a dispute about the data, about the spill data, the number of spills, and also the water quality data on the beach. And therefore, I would really encourage the Commission, recognising all of the limits of the Commission's investigative powers, to look at ways that there could be independently verified data from Whitburn, to really look at what the situation is on the ground. And I would remind, I hope ultimately that Brexit, well, I campaign to remain. I believe the value for the North East of England of us being a member of the European Union, not just for our environment, but for many reasons. Ultimately, if a deal is done, there is likely to be a transition period where we remain a European member state subject to all of these rules. I would like us subject to environmental protections in the long run, and therefore, Brexit can't be seen as an opportunity to take the foot off the pedal when it comes to ensuring that these European laws are properly implemented in areas like my own. This is a way that we rebuild the trust with areas which had very strong leave votes, where people have a cynicism about what the EU does in their daily lives. And this is a very concrete example where you can demonstrate the real value of our EU membership for local people in communities like Whitburn and those communities north of Sunderland. Thank you.